I needed the money yesterday, my son demanded, handing me his wife's $300,000 debt as if it were a simple bill. Don't disappoint me, Mum, Richard added, his voice cold. I just smiled, pouring more coffee while he scrolled through messages on his phone. 6 hours later, my account was at zero. When they came back that evening for the money, they found the house empty with only a single envelope on the table. When they opened it, they went pale. But before we continue, make sure to subscribe to the channel and leave a comment. Where are you watching this video from? We love to know how far our stories are reaching. The doorbell rang at 7:30 on a random Tuesday morning. 3 insistent rings, as if the world were ending. I already knew who it was even before I opened the door. My son, Richard, only ever showed up unannounced when he needed something. I left my half-full cup of tea on the kitchen counter and walked slowly down the hall. Through the living room windows, I could see his car, a luxury SUV parked haphazardly in the driveway. Richard had inherited his father's business acumen, but not an ounce of his patience or consideration. When I opened the door, he was already on his phone, a brown paper envelope in his other hand. His face, always so much like his father's, was tense. "Mom," he said, walking past me without a hug, just a quick peck in the air. "We need to talk." Richard went straight to the kitchen as if the house were still his, despite having moved out more than 15 years ago. He sat in my chair, put the envelope on the table, and started checking his phone while I followed him in. "A coffee would be great," he mumbled, without looking up from the screen. I made the coffee mechanically. 10 years a widow, and I still served the men in my life as if it were my only function. As I placed the mug in front of him, I noticed how tense his hands looked, his knuckles white as he typed. "Is Fernanda okay? And the kids?" I asked, referring to my daughter-in-law and the grandchildren I almost never saw. "They're fine," Richard responded vaguely. He finally put his phone away and took a sip of coffee. "I'll get right to the point, Mum. I have a problem." I sat on the other side of the table. On the wall clock, the minutes ticked by slowly. "Fernanda got herself into a complicated situation," he continued, pushing the envelope towards me. "She made some investments that didn't work out." I opened the envelope carefully. Inside were bank statements, collection notices, and a loan agreement with a number highlighted in red, $300,000. My heart raced. It was almost all of my retirement money, plus what was left from the sale of the apartment in downtown Philadelphia after Edward passed away. "Richard," I began, my throat feeling dry. "This is practically everything I have." He took another sip of coffee, his cold eyes finally looking at me. "Mum, it's not like you need this money. You live alone in this house that's already paid for. Your expenses are minimal. And for God's sake, you're 68 years old. What are you saving it for?" His words hit me like a slap. The house was the only valuable asset I had left, and even it was in his name. It was a decision Edward made years ago to avoid any inheritance issues. "It's not that simple," I argued. "I have my medications, my doctor's appointments." Richard gently tapped the table, interrupting me. "Fernanda just made some bad investments, okay? She trusted the wrong person. If we don't pay this off by tomorrow," he took a deep breath, "things are going to get ugly." "They're not bankers, Mum. They're dangerous people." "What kind of dangerous people?" I asked. My voice was barely a whisper. "You don't need to know the details," he said impatiently. "Just trust me. It's a loan, right? I'll pay you back as soon as I reorganize the company's finances." I looked at the envelope, at my son's face, at the door leading to the backyard where he used to play. Now, it was as if a stranger was sitting in my kitchen. "You've asked me for loans before, Richard. I've never seen that money again." His face hardened. This is serious, Mom. This isn't the time for drama. He stood up, pacing the kitchen like a caged animal. I'm your only son, your family. You always said you would do anything for me. There was the manipulation I knew so well, the same one Edward used, the one I had allowed my entire life. I need to think, I said in a low voice. There's no time to think. Richard raised his voice. I need that money in my account before the end of the day. Tomorrow is too late. He stopped behind my chair, placing his hands on my shoulders. I felt their weight like chains. Mum, he said, his voice softening. You know I wouldn't ask you if it wasn't important. It's for Fernanda's safety, for our family. Family, the word that always worked on me, like a magic spell that made me bend, give in, sacrifice. Okay, I finally replied. I'll transfer it to you. The relief on Richard's face was almost palpable. He smiled for the first time since he arrived. That smile reminded me of the boy he once was. Thanks, Mum. I knew I could count on you. He checked his watch. I have a meeting now, but I'll be back tonight for dinner, and we can get this sorted out. Deal? I nodded, unable to speak. Richard took the folder, gave me a quick kiss on the forehead, and headed for the door. Don't disappoint me, Mum, he added before leaving, as if I were the daughter and he were the father. The door slammed shut, and I was left alone in the kitchen, with his half-empty coffee cup and the certainty that I had just made a terrible mistake. Through the window, I watched his car speed away, kicking up gravel from the yard I had so lovingly cared for. It was then that an idea began to form in my mind, an idea the old Eleanor would never have considered. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in a long time. Marissa? It's Eleanor. I need your help. My friend arrived in less than half an hour. Marissa and I had met in college almost 50 years ago. She went on to become a lawyer while I dropped out to marry Edward. She never approved of my choices, but she always stayed close, patiently waiting for me to open my eyes. 300,000? Marissa nearly choked on the tea I had served her. Eleanor, that's insane. It's everything you have. I shook my head, feeling the weight of reality. It's not the first time, Marissa. Last year it was 100,000 for a business expansion. Before that, 50,000 to resolve a problem with suppliers. I've never seen that money again. Marissa set her mug down on the table with a clatter. And why do you keep giving it to him? Eleanor, you've always been so smart. How can you not see what's happening? The question hit me like a punch. Why did I keep doing it? Was it for love? For fear? Out of habit? He's my son, I replied, the same automatic answer as always. And you're his mother, not his bank, Marissa countered. Edward manipulated you for 30 years, and now Richard is following in his footsteps. When is this going to stop? I looked out the window at the garden I had cultivated on my own after Edward's death. The roses were finally blooming, after years of trying to grow in soil that wasn't right for them. Like me, they had persisted against all odds. Today, I replied, surprising even myself. It stops today. Marissa stared at me, confused. What do you mean? I took a deep breath, feeling something inside me break and then mend itself. I want you to help me transfer all my money to an account Richard doesn't know about, and I want you to help me get out of this house before he gets back. Marissa's eyes widened, then a slow smile spread across her face. Eleanor Miller, I've waited almost 50 years to hear you say something like that. She pulled her phone out of her purse. I have a summer apartment in Miami that's empty. The keys are at my office. How long do we have before he gets back? He said he was coming back for dinner, So, about 10 hours. Marissa checked her watch. That's enough time. We'll go to the bank first. Then we'll stop by the lawyer's office so you can give me power of attorney in case you need legal representation. After that, we'll pack your bags and we're out of here. I stood up, feeling a mix of fear and exhilaration. In all my life, I had never made such a radical decision. He's going to be furious, I murmured, more to myself than to Marissa. She took my hands. Elena, are you afraid of him? I thought of my son's face when he didn't get what he wanted, how his voice changed, how his eyes hardened. Yes, I admitted, the same way I was afraid of his father. Then it's time to stop being afraid. Marissa squeezed my hands. Let's go get your things. I went to my room and took out the suitcase I had used only twice in the last 10 years. I opened the closet and started picking out clothes, but soon realized I didn't want to take much from that life. Just the essentials, a few outfits, my medications, important documents, and the few pieces of jewelry that had sentimental value. At the bottom of the dresser drawer, I found the small wooden box where I kept the only money Edward never knew I had. It was a small amount, a few $1,000s I had saved by selling baked goods and embroidered pieces over the years. My secret, my small rebellion. I took the picture frame with my mother's photo and hesitated over the one of my son Richard as a little boy. After a moment, I decided to leave it behind. When I went back to the living room, Marissa was on the phone, organizing everything. The flight to Miami is confirmed for 3 in the afternoon. We still have time to go to the bank and the lawyer's office. At the bank, the manager seemed surprised by my request to transfer all the money to a new account. Mrs. Miller, are you sure? It's a considerable amount. Absolutely, I replied, signing the documents. And I need this transaction not to show up on any statements sent to my residential address. As we waited for the transfer to process, Marissa looked at me curiously. What are you going to leave for Richard? Some kind of explanation? I thought for a moment. A note, I decided, and a lesson he should have learned a long time ago. When we got back to the house, I carefully wrote a note on a piece of paper and left it on the kitchen table. It said, I'm the one who's disappointed. Revenge is a dish best served cold. As I walked out the door with my suitcase, I looked back at the house that had been my prison for so many years. In the garden, the roses swayed in the breeze, free and strong, just as I would be from that day on. In the taxi on the way to the airport, Marissa took my hand. Are you okay? I looked out the window, watching the city rush by, taking decades of submission with it. No, I answered honestly, but I will be. Marissa's apartment in Miami was small but cozy, with a view of the ocean. That first night, sitting on the balcony listening to the waves, I turned on my phone, only to turn it off again when I saw there were 17 missed calls from Richard. I wasn't ready to face him. He'll find you eventually, Marissa said as she poured me a glass of wine. We need a long-term plan. I nodded, feeling strangely calm. I never thought I would have the courage to do this. I always knew you had it, Marissa smiled. You just needed a little push. In the following days, my phone kept ringing. Richard, his wife Fernanda, even my sister Jane, who had probably been recruited to try to locate me. In one of the voicemails, Richard alternated between desperate pleas and veiled threats. Mom, please call me. I'm worried about you. And then, you can't just disappear like this. The house is in my name. Remember? Think carefully about what you're doing. A week after my escape, I started rebuilding my life. I opened an account at a new bank. I rented a small apartment near the beach and started looking for something to occupy my time. At 68 years old, I had never really worked. but I discovered that my baked goods and embroidered pieces had a market at local craft fairs. Marissa remained in Boston, but she became my eyes and ears. It was she who told me about Richard's furious visit to her office. He was out of his mind, she recounted over the phone. He was demanding to know where you were, threatening to sue, saying you weren't mentally capable of making financial decisions. And what did you tell him? I asked. I told him you were perfectly sane, and that if he continued with the threats, I would file a restraining order. Marissa laughed. He turned beet red. I don't think anyone had ever stood up to him before. At the end of the first month, I received a formal letter from Richard's lawyer. It demanded my immediate return, alleging concern for my mental health and threatening legal action to have me declared incompetent. In the same envelope, there was a handwritten note from Fernanda, surprisingly humble. Eleanor, please, come back. Richard is out of control. The creditors are pressuring us. We need you. I handed the documents to Marissa, who took care of responding formally, attaching recent medical reports that proved my sanity and a detailed declaration of the loans Richard had extorted from me over the years. They don't have a case, Marissa assured me. But Richard won't give up easily. He lost his personal bank, and that made him furious. In the second month, I received an unexpected visit. My daughter-in-law, Fernanda, appeared at my new apartment, pale and noticeably thinner. How did you find me? I asked, surprised to see her at my door. We hired a detective, she admitted, looking embarrassed. Can I come in? I hesitated, but ended up letting her. Fernanda looked around my small apartment with curiosity. It's cozy, she commented, clearly surprised to see me living in such a modest space after the sprawling house I had left behind. It's mine, I replied simply. Is it? We sat on the small balcony, the ocean visible in the distance. Fernanda held her cup with trembling hands. Things are bad, Eleanor, she finally said. Richard is different, aggressive, losing control. How are my grandkids? I asked, feeling a pang of guilt. Scared. They don't understand what's happening. Richard sold the car. We're trying to sell the beach apartment, all to pay off the debts. She paused. It wasn't just the 300,000, Elena. There's a lot more. I wasn't surprised. Edward always had another hidden debt too. So you didn't come here to convince me to go back, I stated. You came to ask for more money. Fernanda looked down. It's more complicated than that. The men we owe aren't patient. Richard told them you have the money. A shiver ran down my spine. Did he use me as collateral? Fernanda didn't answer, but her silence was confirmation enough. You need to get out of that house, Fernanda, I told her, taking her hands. Take the kids and go to your parents' house. It's not that simple, she murmured. Richard controls everything. Our accounts, our documents. Her voice broke. I don't know how to get out, the same way you didn't know. Her words moved me deeply. It was true. For decades, I didn't know how to get out, how to break the cycle, until I finally found the courage. I can help you, I offered. Not with money, but to get out. Fernanda looked at me with a mix of hope and fear. He'll find us, just like he found you. Then we'll be ready when he does, I replied with a confidence I had never felt before. But first, we need to get you and the kids out of that house. After Fernanda left, with a plan laid out and my new phone number carefully hidden in her boot, I sat on the balcony, watching the sunset. The orange horizon seemed to be a symbol of my own transformation. From darkness to light, my phone rang. It was Marissa. Fernanda found you, didn't she? She asked bluntly. How did you know? Richard showed up at my office again, this time with one of his creditors, a scary guy with scars on his face. They made veiled threats, wanting to know where you were. My stomach sank. What did you tell them? I said that if they laid a finger on you, me, or anyone related to this case, I would make sure they spent the rest of their lives behind bars. Marissa paused. Eleanor, this is getting dangerous. Richard is desperate. I know, I replied, watching the last ray of sun disappear over the horizon. And desperate people do desperate things. The next morning, I was woken by insistent knocking at the door. For one terrifying moment, I thought Richard had found me. But when I looked through the peephole, I saw a woman I didn't recognize. Mrs. Eleanor Miller, she asked when I opened the door partially, keeping the security chain on. Yes, that's me. I'm Detective Olivia. She showed a badge. Civil police, we need to talk about your son, Richard Miller. My heart raced. Did something happen to him? The detective's expression remained neutral. Can I come in? I let her in and offered her coffee, which she accepted. As I prepared the mugs in the small kitchen, I tried to steady my trembling hands. Mrs. Miller, the detective began, sitting on the sofa. Your son is being investigated for financial fraud, document forgery, and possible involvement with loan sharks. We'd like to know if you had any knowledge of these activities. I felt like the floor had disappeared beneath my feet. A part of me had always known that Richard wasn't honest in his business dealings, just as his father hadn't been. But hearing the words, police investigation, made it all terribly real. No, I answered honestly. I knew he had financial problems, but not the extent or nature of them. The detective wrote something in her notebook. You left home suddenly 2 months ago, correct? Can you tell us why? I told her everything. The successive loans, the unkept promises, the emotional pressure, the pressure for the $300,000. The detective listened without interrupting, only making occasional notes. Did he use your name on any documents? Did he ask you to sign papers without explaining what they were for? I thought for a moment. A few years ago, he asked me to sign some documents to facilitate financial transfers in case I needed help. He said it was for my protection in old age. The detective nodded. We found several suspicious transactions in accounts opened in your name, Mrs. Miller, accounts you probably didn't know existed. I closed my eyes, feeling a wave of nausea. Richard hadn't just manipulated me. He had stolen my identity. What happens now? I asked, trying to stay composed. We will continue the investigation. Your formal statement will be needed soon. She hesitated. I must warn you that your son will likely be indicted in the coming weeks, and considering the people he got involved with, it would be wise to reinforce your security. After the detective left, I called Marissa, who promised to fly to Miami on the next flight. I always knew Richard was involved in shady things, she said, but I never imagined it would get to this point. That afternoon, I received a message from Fernanda. He found out about our plan. I'm locked in the room with the kids. He's breaking everything. My blood ran cold. I immediately called Detective Olivia, who promised to send a patrol car to Richard's address. The next few hours were a blur of calls, messages, and fragmented updates. By nightfall, all I knew was that Fernanda and my grandchildren were safe at a shelter, and that Richard had been taken into custody for questioning after resisting police intervention. Marissa arrived around 9 in the evening, finding me on the balcony, looking out at the dark ocean. She sat beside me in silence for a few minutes. How do you feel? She finally asked. Guilty, I admitted. If I hadn't left, maybe this wouldn't have happened. Marissa shook her head firmly. No, Eleanor. If you hadn't left, you would be sinking along with him, probably being used for more fraudulent schemes. She took my hand. You did the only thing you could have done. You saved yourself. And in doing so, you probably saved Fernanda and your grandchildren too. The next morning, the headline of the local newspaper took my breath away. Businessman arrested for fraud and criminal ties. The photo of Richard being led away in handcuffs by the police seemed to belong to another reality, not my own. My phone rang. It was Detective Olivia. "Mrs. Miller, your son is requesting your presence at the police station. He insists on only speaking to you." I looked at Marissa, who had already read the news and was watching me with concern. "You don't have to go," she said, "after everything he's done." "Yes, I do," I interrupted, surprising myself. "I need to look him in the eye and end this once and for all." The police station was a cold and impersonal place, with fluorescent lights that highlighted every wrinkle on my tired face. Richard was brought into a visiting room, handcuffed and wearing a grey uniform that made him look smaller, older. When he saw me, his eyes, so much like his father's, filled with tears. "Mom," he said, his voice cracking. "You came." I sat across from him, keeping my distance. "You wanted to see me. I'm here." Richard looked like a cornered animal, glancing around as if searching for an escape. "You don't understand the situation I'm in," he began, leaning forward. "These people don't play around. If I don't pay what I owe—" "No," I interrupted, my voice surprisingly firm. "You don't understand the situation you're in. I'm not here to give you money, Richard. That time is over." His face changed, the vulnerability giving way to rage. "You abandoned me when I needed you most, your own family. Is that what you're going to tell your grandkids? That you let their father rot in jail?" I took a deep breath, refusing to be manipulated again. "I'll tell them that their father made bad decisions, just like their grandfather, and that I finally made a good one." Richard slammed his handcuffed hands on the table. "The house is in my name. You have nothing." "I have myself," I replied, standing up. "Something I almost completely lost because of men like you and your father." I walked to the door, then stopped and turned. "Fernanda and the kids are safe. They'll have a chance to start over, away from you." I paused. "And so will I." As I walked out of the police station, I felt as if an enormous weight had been lifted from my shoulders. The Miami sun was shining brightly, almost blinding, after the artificial light of the station. Marissa was waiting for me in the car. "How did it go?" she asked, concerned. I took one last look at the grey building where I had left my son and decades of submission. "Liberating," I replied. And for the first time in a long time, I smiled a genuine smile. 6 months had passed since my escape and Richard's arrest. Winter had come to Miami, bringing strong winds and a rough sea. My small apartment now truly felt like a home, with my plants on the balcony and the colourful embroidered pieces I sold at the local fair adorning the walls. Fernanda and my grandchildren, 8-year-old Ethan and 6-year-old Mariana, had moved to a town in the middle of Idaho near her family. We spoke weekly on video calls, a technology I learned to master with Marissa's help. The kids were adapting well to their new life, though they still asked about their father occasionally. "Grandma, when can we visit you?" Ethan asked during our last conversation. "During summer vacation, I promise. We'll build sandcastles and look for shells on the beach." Fernanda's image appeared on the screen, smiling shyly. She looked healthier now, with fuller cheeks and a calmer gaze. "Are you really inviting us, Eleanor?" "Of course. My apartment is small, but we'll all fit. It'll be nice to have the sound of kids' laughter around here." After the call, I sat on the balcony watching the angry waves crash on the beach. Richard's trial was scheduled for the next month. The accusations were serious: fraud, forgery, use of fake documents, association with a criminal organization. Marissa estimated a sentence of at least 10 years. I had agreed to testify not for revenge, but for justice, for myself, for Fernanda, and for everyone else Richard had deceived over the years. The phone rang, pulling me from my thoughts. It was a number I didn't recognize. Elena Miller. A male voice, unfamiliar. Yes? Who is this? This is David Rodriguez, your son's lawyer. I felt a tightness in my chest. In the last few months, Richard had changed lawyers several times, each one promising legal miracles that never materialized. What can I do for you? Richard would like to propose a deal. He has information on bigger operations that might interest the district attorney in exchange for a reduced sentence, but he needs your help. I took a deep breath, already imagining where this was going. What kind of help? Financial, of course, to cover the fees of a specialized legal team, $200,000. I almost laughed. The audacity was incredible. Mr. Rodriguez, I no longer have that amount, and even if I did, I wouldn't use it that way. Mrs. Eleanor, his tone hardened. Your son is facing more than 10 years in prison. As a mother, I interrupted. I did what I could for decades. Now Richard needs to face the consequences of his own actions. There was a prolonged silence on the other end of the line. He said you would answer like that. He asked me to tell you that he still has copies of documents you signed, documents that could implicate you in some of his schemes. My stomach knotted, but I kept my voice firm. Tell my son that blackmail is another crime to add to his list, and that I'm willing to face any accusation if it means finally breaking this cycle. I hung up the phone with trembling hands. I immediately called Marissa and told her about the conversation. He's bluffing, she assured me. Any documents you might have signed, we already clarified with the police that it was under manipulation. Besides, the investigation has already established a pattern of his behavior. Still, that night was difficult. I stayed awake, mentally reviewing every paper I had signed over the years at Richard or Edward's request. How many contracts? How many powers of attorney? How many documents I barely read, trusting that my husband or my son had my best interests at heart. The next morning, I was woken by knocking at the door. It was Detective Olivia again, accompanied by another officer. Mrs. Miller, we need you to come with us to the station. There's been a development in your son's case. On the way, the detective explained. Richard had tried to bribe a guard to get a contraband cell phone into his cell. The guard, who was part of an internal operation, had recorded everything. At the station, they showed me the transcript of a call Richard intended to make as soon as he had the phone. It was to one of the men he owed money to, offering my address in Miami as a guarantee that he would pay his debts. My mom has money hidden. If I can't pay, you know where to find her. I read the words, feeling a coldness that seemed to come from inside my bones. My own son was willing to put my life at risk to save his own skin. Mrs. Miller, the detective spoke gently, considering this new evidence, we are offering you temporary police protection, and we strongly suggest you consider relocating once again. I returned home escorted by an officer. Marissa was already there, having been informed by the detective. She hugged me as soon as I walked in. I'm already looking for a new place for you, a gated community with security. I looked around my small apartment, at the plants I had so lovingly cared for, the colourful curtains I had sewn, the view of the ocean that brought me peace every morning. No, I said, surprising myself. I'm not going to run again. I'm not going to let Richard continue to control my life, even from behind bars. Marissa looked at me with a mix of concern and admiration. Eleanor, these men are dangerous. I know, and I'm going to take all the necessary precautions. But this is my home now, the first one I truly chose for myself. I'm not going to give it up. In the following days, we installed a complete security system. Cameras, alarms, reinforced locks. The police increased patrols in the neighborhood, and 2 plainclothes officers took turns in a car parked in front of the building. Fernanda called me in a panic after being informed of the situation. "Eleanor, come here. Stay with us. Please." "I'm safe, honey," I reassured her. "And I have a life here now. My craft fairs, my friends, my senior swimming classes." I laughed slightly. At 68 years old, I finally found out who I am when I'm not taking care of ungrateful men. A week later, when the initial panic had subsided, I received an official envelope. It was a summons to testify at Richard's trial, scheduled for 2 weeks from now. Marissa, who had stayed in Miami with me, reviewed the document. "Are you ready for this? Facing him in court won't be easy." I looked out the window, towards the ocean that had become my confidant. "I'm ready." The courthouse was an imposing building in downtown Boston. I was back in the city for the first time since my escape, feeling a strange disconnect from the streets that had been my home for decades. Marissa was driving, while I watched the urban landscape pass by the window. "Nervous?" she asked when we parked. "Strangely, no," I replied. "I feel like I'm closing a chapter." Finally, in the courtroom, I sat next to Marissa in the front row. The prosecutor, a middle-aged woman with shrewd eyes, came to greet us before the session began. "Mrs. Miller, your testimony will be crucial today. Richard is trying to present himself as a victim of circumstances, manipulated by more powerful associates." "He was always good at presenting himself as a victim," I commented. The side door opened and Richard entered, escorted by 2 guards. He was thinner, his face marked by deep, dark circles. Our eyes met for a moment, his pleading, mine firm. The judge entered, and everyone stood up. The trial began with procedural formalities, followed by the testimony of forensic experts, who detailed the complexity of Richard's financial schemes. When my name was finally called, I walked to the witness stand with slow but determined steps. After the oath, the prosecutor began. "Miller, can you tell us about your relationship with the defendant, your son?" I looked directly at Richard as I spoke. "I raised him alone after my husband's death, 10 years ago. Before that, we lived as a seemingly normal family, only seemingly." "What do you mean?" "My husband, Edward, Richard's father, was also manipulative and financially controlling. Richard learned from the best." The prosecutor nodded. "Can you detail how your son manipulated you financially?" I told them everything. The successive loans, the unkept promises, the emotional pressure, the veiled blackmail. In the last episode, he demanded $300,000, practically all my savings, to supposedly pay off his wife's debt. When I realized I would never see that money again, just like I hadn't seen the previous amounts, I decided to leave. "What made you make that decision after so many years of giving in to his demands?" I thought for a moment. Was it the contempt in his voice? I answered honestly. When he said, "Don't disappoint me, Mum," I realized he didn't see me as a person, just as a resource to be exploited. In that moment, something inside me broke, and it mended in a different way. Richard's lawyer stood for cross-examination. He was a middle-aged man in an expensive suit with a calculated expression. "Mrs. Miller, do you consider yourself a good mother?" The question took me by surprise. I saw the prosecutor begin to object, but I raised my hand slightly. For decades, I believed that being a good mother meant giving my son everything: money, time, my self-esteem. Now I understand that being a good mother also means teaching responsibility and consequences. You abandoned your son when he needed you most. The lawyer pressed. No, sir. I stopped enabling destructive behavior. There's a big difference. And what about the threats your son supposedly made against you? Don't you find it convenient that these allegations are only coming up now, just as he's about to propose a deal with the district attorney? I remained calm, despite the insinuation. The recordings speak for themselves. And no, I don't find it convenient that my own son offered my address to criminals as collateral for his debts. I find it tragic. When I was finally dismissed, I returned to my seat feeling my legs tremble. Marissa squeezed my hand in silence. The trial continued with other testimonies, Richard's employees, harmed clients, even Fernanda, who described years of lies and manipulation. Throughout it all, I watched Richard become more and more agitated, whispering furiously with his lawyer. At the end of the day, when the judge announced a recess until the next morning, Richard looked at me one last time before being led away. There was no longer a plea in his eyes, just a cold hatred that made me shudder. Back at the hotel, that night, I couldn't sleep. Richard's expression haunted me. It was the same expression Edward used to have when he didn't get what he wanted, a mix of rage and calculation, as if he were planning his next move. In the morning, we returned to the courthouse to hear the closing arguments. The prosecutor presented a solid case, detailing years of fraud and manipulation. Richard's lawyer tried to paint him as a struggling businessman who made mistakes, but not intentional crimes. When the judge retired to deliberate, Marissa and I went to a nearby cafe for coffee. I was distractedly stirring my coffee when I noticed a man sitting a few tables away, watching us. When our eyes met, he quickly looked away. "Marissa," I whispered, "is that man watching us?" She glanced discreetly. He must be a reporter. The case has gotten some local media attention, but something about the man's posture, the way he avoided eye contact while clearly monitoring us, alarmed me. "Let's go back to the courthouse," I suggested. As we left, I noticed the man also getting up. On the way back, he kept his distance, but continued to follow us. At the courthouse, I mentioned the incident to one of the police officers, who promised to keep an eye out. The session resumed with the judge returning to announce his decision. "In the case of the State versus Richard Edward Miller, this court finds you guilty of all charges." A wave of relief washed over me, immediately followed by a deep sadness. My son, the boy I once cradled in my arms, was now officially a convicted criminal. The judge continued, detailing the sentence. 12 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 4 years, in addition to fines and restitution to the victims. Richard remained impassive during the sentencing. When the guards approached to lead him away, he turned in my direction. "This isn't over," he said, just loud enough for me to hear. "You're going to regret this." As we left the courthouse, I again noticed the same man watching from a distance. This time, I pointed him out directly to the officer accompanying us. The man noticed and quickly disappeared into the crowd. "We need to go back to Miami today," I told Marissa as we walked to the car. "I don't feel safe here." In the week following the trial, I tried to get back to my routine in Miami. Police protection had been reduced to periodic patrols, as Richard's threats seemed less viable now that he was convicted and under constant surveillance. One afternoon, as I was returning from the fair where I sold my embroidered pieces, I noticed an unfamiliar car parked near my building. Something about the vehicle put me on high alert. Maybe it was the fact that the windows were too dark, or that it was strategically positioned to have a view of the building's entrance. Instead of going into the building, I walked right past it and called Detective Olivia. "It might be nothing," she admitted, But it doesn't hurt to check. Stay in a public place while we send someone. I went into a nearby cafe and waited, watching through the window. 20 minutes later, a patrol car approached the suspicious vehicle. Two men quickly got out and tried to walk away, but they were intercepted by the police. My phone rang. It was the detective. "Mrs. Miller, we caught two individuals with criminal records. They had unregistered weapons and your address written down on a piece of paper." A shiver ran down my spine. "Richard's associates?" "Probably. We're interrogating them now. Do you have a safe place you can stay for a few days?" I called Marissa immediately. Her response was quick and decisive. "I'll come get you in an hour. We'll go to my beach house in Naples. Nobody knows about it." I returned to my apartment, escorted by police to pack some essential belongings. As I hurriedly packed a suitcase, I looked around at the home I had so lovingly built. Once again, I needed to run. Or maybe not. A thought began to form in my mind. An idea that would have seemed absurd to the old Eleanor, but that now made perfect sense. When Marissa arrived, I explained my plan to her. "It's risky," she warned. "Living in fear is riskier," I replied, "and I'm tired of hiding." The next day, instead of hiding out in Naples, I went back to my apartment, this time with a clear objective. With the help of Detective Olivia and her team, we set a trap. The two arrested men had been persuaded to cooperate in exchange for reduced sentences. They revealed that Richard, using another inmate's phone during visiting hours, had hired a third person to give me a scare, a euphemism for something much more sinister. "He doesn't care if you get really hurt," the detective explained. "He just wants you to know that he still has power, even from inside prison." The plan was simple. I would maintain my normal routine, pretending not to know anything, while plainclothes officers monitored my every move. When Richard's guy showed up, he would be arrested in the act. For 3 days, I lived in a state of constant alert. Every noise made me jump. Every stranger on the street seemed like a threat. On the morning of the 4th day, while I was watering the plants on the balcony, I noticed a man leaning against a pole on the other side of the street, watching me directly. Our eyes met briefly before I went inside the apartment and signaled to the plainclothes officer disguised as a housekeeper who was cleaning my living room. "That's him," I whispered. "I'm sure of it." The man continued to watch the building for about half an hour. Then, slowly, he began to cross the street towards the entrance. The doorman, another disguised officer, let him in without question. I sat on the living room sofa, facing the door, and waited. My heart was beating so fast I could hear it in my ears. The police had hidden in the bathroom with the door ajar. The doorbell rang. I took a deep breath and went to answer. "Mrs. Elena Miller?" the man asked, a common-looking individual who could easily go unnoticed in a crowd. "Yes. I have a message from your son." Before he could make any move, 3 officers emerged from different points in the hallway, quickly subduing him. The man didn't resist, seeming almost relieved to have been caught. Later that day, Detective Olivia visited me to inform me that the man had confessed everything. Richard had promised to pay him $5,000 to scare the ungrateful mother who had abandoned him. "And what exactly did scare mean?" I asked. The detective hesitated. "It involved breaking some objects in your apartment, making verbal threats, and," she paused, "and leaving visible marks on you. Nothing fatal, but enough to make you never feel safe again." I sat down, feeling my legs buckle. "Is that enough for new charges against Richard?" "Yes, attempted assault, hiring a third party to commit a crime, threats. That will probably eliminate any possibility of parole for the next few years." A week later, I visited Richard in prison. He seemed surprised to see me, as if he didn't expect me to have the courage to face him again. I came to say goodbye, Richard, I said, when we sat face to face, separated by glass. Goodbye? He frowned. Yes, the person you tried to scare confessed everything. You're going to face new charges, and you'll probably be here a lot longer than you imagined. I paused. But I didn't come here for that. I came to say that I'm moving on with my life. Richard laughed bitterly. What life? You're 68 years old, Mom. You're all alone. I'm free, I corrected him, and I've discovered that it's never too late to start over. You know, I always defined myself as Edward's wife or Richard's mother. Now I'm discovering who Elena is. He looked at me with a mix of contempt and confusion. And who is Eleanor? I smiled genuinely. A woman who finally learned to value herself. A woman who is no longer afraid. Richard slammed his hands on the glass, frustrated. You think this is over, but it's not over. I'm going to get out one day. When that day comes, if it comes, I'll be ready. I stood up. Goodbye, Richard. As I walked out of the prison, I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in decades. The sky was a particularly brilliant blue that day. The air seemed sweeter. Marissa was waiting for me in the car. How did it go? Liberating, I replied. Truly liberating. A year had passed since my escape. Autumn had come to Miami, painting the trees in shades of red and orange. My small embroidery business had grown. Now I had 3 students, older women like me, who came every week to learn and, most importantly, to talk. Fernanda and the kids had visited me twice. Ethan and Mariana filled my apartment with their laughter and energy, building sandcastles on the beach and collecting shells that now decorated my balcony. Fernanda was working as a teacher in her new town, slowly rebuilding her confidence. Richard had been sentenced to 3 more years due to the attempted intimidation. News about him came occasionally through Detective Olivia, who had become a friend. As far as we knew, he was quiet, perhaps finally accepting his situation. One Saturday afternoon, as I was returning from the craft fair, I found a woman waiting at the entrance to my building. She must have been in her 50s, with greying hair and a face that seemed vaguely familiar. Eleanor Miller? She asked when I approached. Yes? My name is Christine Peterson. She hesitated. I was married to Edward before you. I was speechless. Edward had only vaguely mentioned a previous marriage, saying his ex-wife was unbalanced and obsessed with money, ironies I could now appreciate. Would you like to come in? I finally offered. Sitting in my small living room, with 2 cups of tea between us, Christine explained the reason for her visit. I saw the news about Richard in the paper, about how he financially manipulated you for years. She took a deep breath. Edward did the same thing to me, and when I read about you, I realized I needed to find you, to close a chapter, maybe. How did you find me? It wasn't hard. Your story spread among support groups for women who suffered financial abuse. You've become a kind of symbol of resistance. I couldn't hide my surprise. Me? A symbol? Christine smiled. A woman of almost 70 who left everything behind and started over, facing her own son in court. Yes, Eleanor, you've inspired a lot of us. We talked for hours. Christine told me how Edward had isolated her from her family, controlled every penny, and made her feel incompetent at managing money. How, when she finally got a divorce, he left her with practically nothing, only to then marry me. It was a story that seemed to echo my own life. When he died, she continued, I felt a strange mix of relief and rage. Relief because he could no longer manipulate anyone. Rage because there was never any justice. He never had to face what he did. I understand perfectly, I said. For a long time, I only blamed Richard for his actions. But now I see that Edward planted those seeds. Our son just followed the example he saw at home. The cycle continues, Christine murmured, unless someone breaks it. At the end of the afternoon, I exchanged contact information with Christine and promised to keep in touch. After she left, I stayed on the balcony, watching the sunset and reflecting on our conversation. Edward and Richard, father and son, both now out of my life, one by death, the other by prison, both leaving scars that I was still learning to heal. That night, I wrote in my journal, a habit I had recently picked up. The words flowed easily. Today, at 69 years old, I realized that I spent most of my life trying to be what others wanted me to be. A devoted wife, a selfless mother, a personal bank, always available, always giving in, always afraid of displeasing. Now, finally, I'm learning to just be Eleanor, and discovering that Eleanor is stronger, braver, and more capable than I ever imagined. The money Richard extorted from me over the years, I can't get it back. The years I spent in a suffocating marriage to Edward, I can't have them back. But the time I have left, that's all mine. To live as I choose, without fear, without manipulation, without regrets. The next day, I received an email from Christine. She had talked to other women who went through similar situations and suggested forming a support group. I accepted immediately. Our first meeting was at a cafe near the beach. There were 5 of us, all with stories of financial and emotional control by husbands, sons, and brothers. We shared our experiences, our sorrows, our small and large victories. At the end of the meeting, Marissa, who had accompanied me, suggested, "You should formalize this, create a non-profit organization or something. There are so many women out there who need to hear these stories, who need to know that it's never too late to start over." The idea quickly took shape. In a few months, New Beginnings was officially registered as a non-profit organization dedicated to supporting women victims of financial and emotional abuse. Using my embroidery skills, I created our symbol, a colorful phoenix rising from the ashes. Our first public conference attracted more than 50 women. I was nervous as I walked onto the small makeshift stage, but when I started to speak, my voice grew stronger. My name is Elena Miller. I'm 69 years old. For almost 7 decades, I allowed others to control my life and my money. First my husband, then my son. Until one day when my son demanded $300,000, almost everything I had, something inside me broke and mended itself. I looked at the attentive faces in the audience. It is never too late to say no. It is never too late to start over. And it is never, ever too late to find out who you really are when you're not living for someone else's approval. The applause was deafening. 2 years after my escape, I received an unexpected letter. It was from Richard, written in handwriting that seemed more contained, less impulsive than I remembered. "Mum, it's strange to write that word now. I think I've lost the right to use it. I'm writing not to ask for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it, but to say that I'm doing therapy here in prison. The therapist made me see patterns I couldn't see before. How I repeated with you exactly what Dad did. How I learned to see people as resources, not as people. I'm not apologizing. I'm just acknowledging the truth. And the truth is that you were right to let me face the consequences of my actions. I know you'll probably throw this letter away, and I don't blame you. I just wanted you to know that, despite everything, I'm proud of who you've become. I saw your picture in the newspaper, speaking to those women. You looked different, stronger. Richard." I read the letter several times, feeling contradictory emotions. Caution, because I knew Richard's capacity for manipulation well. Sadness for what could have been. and surprisingly, a touch of hope. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I took the letter to my next therapy session, another healthy habit I had acquired in my new life. "What do you want to do?" my therapist asked after I read her the letter. "I don't know. Part of me wants to believe he's really changing. Another part reminds me how many times I was fooled before. What if both parts are right? What if he's really trying to change, but it's still not safe for you to reconnect?" Those words stayed with me in the following days. Finally, I wrote a brief response. "Richard, I received your letter. I can't say that I trust your words. Trust, once broken, is difficult to regain, but I acknowledge your effort to seek help and reflect on your actions. My life now is focused on helping women who went through what I did. I've found purpose and peace in that work. I sincerely hope you find your way too. If it is a true path of change, maybe we can talk again one day. Not as the mother and son we were, but as two people trying to do better. Elena." I sent the letter without any great expectations. I didn't expect a response, and I didn't receive one for months. And that was okay. My life had taken its own course, independent of Richard or the shadows of the past. Spring came to Miami, transforming the city with vibrant colors. Our organization, New Beginnings, had grown, now with a small office downtown and dedicated volunteers. Twice a week, we offered free financial education workshops, something I myself had to learn from scratch at 68 years old. Fernanda had become a frequent collaborator, sharing her own journey of financial and emotional recovery. My Saturday afternoons were reserved for my grandchildren, who now came to visit me regularly. Ethan, almost 10 years old, loved to fish at the pier near my apartment. Mariana, at 8, had developed an interest in my embroidery. "Grandma," she asked me one afternoon as we worked on a piece together, "are you happy now?" The question took me by surprise. I stopped embroidering and looked at my granddaughter. Her curious eyes, her innocent face. "Yes, honey," I answered sincerely, "happier than I've ever been." "Even without Grandpa and Dad?" I chose my words carefully. "Sometimes, Mariana, we need to move away from the people we love to find ourselves. That doesn't mean we stop loving them. It just means we need to love ourselves too." She seemed to consider my words, her small eyebrows furrowed in concentration, like when I need to be alone in my room sometimes, even though I like playing with Ethan. I smiled, admiring her childlike wisdom. "Exactly." In June of that year, I received an unexpected call. It was Detective Olivia. "Mrs. Miller, I'm calling to inform you that your son will be transferred to a halfway house next month." The news caught me off guard. I thought with the additional charges. "He has demonstrated good behavior," she completed rehabilitation programs, and his lawyers were able to get a sentence review. He'll still have severe restrictions, but he'll be able to work during the day. I thanked her for the information and hung up, feeling an uneasiness I hadn't experienced in a long time. Richard would be partially free. What would that mean for me? For Fernanda? For the kids? I called Marissa immediately. "Do you think I need to worry?" I asked after telling her the news. Marissa, always practical, replied, "We'll increase your apartment's security just in case. But honestly, Eleanor, I doubt he'll try anything. He would have too much to lose." A week later, I received another letter from Richard. Unlike the previous one, this was formal, almost distant. "Eleanor, I'm being transferred to a halfway house next month. I wanted you to hear it from me, not from anyone else. I'll be working on a reforestation project during the day and returning to the facility at night and on weekends. I have no intention of looking for you or interfering in your life in any way. I've learned my lessons the hard way. The therapist here says that respecting boundaries is the first step towards healthy relationships. I'm trying to practice that. I also wanted you to know that I've been corresponding with Fernanda about the kids. She agreed to let me write them letters, under her supervision. Maybe, one day, I can see them again, when she feels it's safe. Richard. The absence of the word mum at the beginning and end of the letter did not go unnoticed. He was truly trying to establish a new dynamic, respecting that our old relationship was irrevocably broken. I shared the letter with Fernanda on our next video call. She confirmed that she was indeed allowing Richard to write to the kids. Their therapists believe it's important not to completely demonize their father, she explained, and his letters have been different. He asks about their interests. He doesn't try to manipulate. He doesn't make empty promises. Do you think he's really changed? I asked. Fernanda shrugged. Maybe, or maybe he's learned to be more subtle. That's why everything is supervised. She paused. Are you going to respond to this letter? I thought for a moment. I think so. To make it clear that I'm aware of the situation and that my boundaries remain intact. My response was brief. Richard, thank you for informing me about your transfer. I wish you well in this new phase. I'm glad to know you're in supervised contact with your children. They deserve a father who can be healthy and positive in their lives. As I said before, I found my way. I sincerely hope you find yours too. Elena. July came with intense heat. On a particularly sweltering Wednesday, I received an unexpected call. Mrs. Elena, this is Sophia, from the Correctional Rehabilitation Center. We have a situation with your son, Richard Miller. My heart raced. Is he okay? Physically, yes, but there was an incident at the worksite today. He had an argument with another inmate, and well, he refused to retaliate when he was provoked. In fact, he walked away and found a supervisor. The problem is that it makes him a target for other inmates, and we're worried about his safety. What does that have to do with me? I asked, confused. Richard requested a transfer to another project, ideally one where he can work alone or with direct supervision. We have an opening in an urban rehabilitation program restoring a public park near your neighborhood. But we need your approval, given the history between you. I was silent for a moment, processing the situation. Richard had chosen not to retaliate, even when provoked, something the Richard I knew would never have done. And now he needed my help. Did he specifically ask to work near me? I asked cautiously. No, Ma'am. In fact, when we mentioned the location, he hesitated and asked if there were other options. But this is the only project that meets his security needs right now. That surprised me. Richard was really trying to respect my space. How far would his worksite be from my apartment? I asked. Approximately 15 blocks. He wouldn't have permission to leave the project area, which will be monitored. I took a deep breath. Okay, I give my approval. After hanging up, I questioned my decision. Was I being naive again? Or was I finally exercising compassion without compromising my boundaries? I called Marissa and explained the situation. You did the right thing, she assured me. Keeping Richard safe while he tries to rehabilitate doesn't mean lowering your defenses. It just means you're human and you have compassion. The following week, Richard started his new job at the park. On purpose, I changed my route to the market to pass by there, keeping my distance. I saw him from afar, planting young trees under the scorching sun. He was thinner, his posture less arrogant. For a moment he seemed to feel my presence and looked in my direction, but I didn't get closer. In August, I received another letter. Elena, I know you saw me at the park a few weeks ago. Thank you for not approaching me. And thank you for approving my transfer to this project. The work has been therapeutic. There is something deeply satisfying about transforming an abandoned space into something beautiful and useful for the community. I'm not asking for forgiveness or reconciliation. I just wanted to express gratitude for this small act of kindness that I don't deserve. Richard. The letter was different from the others, more centered, less manipulative. I decided to respond with a symbolic gesture. The next day, I left a small box at the community center that supervised the project. Inside were good quality gardening tools and a book on urban landscaping. No note, no expectations. Weeks passed without a response, and that was okay. I had learned that healthy relationships don't require immediate or calculated reciprocity. In September, our organization New Beginnings held a major event, a weekend workshop on financial independence for women. I would be the main speaker, sharing my journey from total dependence to financial autonomy. On the morning of the event, the hall was filled with almost 100 women. I walked onto the stage feeling that familiar mix of nervousness and determination. "Good morning," I began. "My name is Elena Miller. At 70 years old, I'm learning who I am when I'm not being defined by the men in my life." The audience laughed gently, many nodding in recognition. 3 years ago, my son showed up at my door demanding $300,000, almost everything I had. Like so many times before, he was counting on my inability to say no. And as so many of you know, these patterns don't start out of nowhere. They are cultivated over decades. In my case, it started with my husband controlling every penny, every decision, making me believe that I was incapable of managing my own life. As I spoke, I noticed movement at the back of the room. A tall, thin figure had entered discreetly and was standing near the door. My heart raced as I recognized Richard. For a moment, I lost the thread of my speech. The audience sensed my excitement, some turning to see what had distracted me. I took a deep breath and continued. The most difficult and most liberating moment of my life was when I finally said no. When I walked out the door with only a suitcase and the determination to no longer be an extension of someone else's bank account. I spoke for 30 more minutes, aware of Richard's silent presence at the back of the room. He didn't try to get closer, he just listened. When I finished, I received a standing ovation. Women came up to me to share their stories, ask for advice, and offer thanks. Richard stayed where he was, patiently waiting for the crowd to thin out. Finally, when the hall was almost empty, he slowly approached. He seemed uncertain, vulnerable in a way I had never seen before. "Hello," he said simply. "Hello," I replied. "Your speech was both powerful and painful to listen to." He paused. "Thank you for the gardening tools." We were in an awkward silence, two people who were once so close, now practically strangers. "How did you know about the event?" I finally asked. "Fernanda mentioned it in a letter. I asked for special permission to come, just to listen." I nodded, noticing how he was respecting boundaries, asking for permission instead of assuming rights. "Are you okay?" I asked, genuinely curious. "I'm different," he replied after a moment of reflection. "Learning to live with the consequences of my choices, learning to exist without manipulating or controlling." He looked at me directly, that people are not means to an end. We talked for almost an hour. There were no great revelations or dramatic reconciliations, just two adults sharing experiences honestly, perhaps for the first time. When we said goodbye, Richard asked, "Can we do this again sometime?" "Maybe," I replied. "One step at a time." The next morning, as I walked on the beach with Marissa, I reflected on the meeting. "Do you think he's really changed?" my friend asked. "I think he's trying," I answered honestly, "and that's more than Edward ever did." "And what about you? Are you ready to forgive?" I watched the waves breaking on the sand, their eternal rhythm of destruction and renewal. Forgiveness isn't something you give all at once, I finally said. It's a daily practice. I'm learning to forgive, both him and myself, for allowing it for so long. That afternoon, sitting on the balcony of my small apartment, I wrote in my journal. Today, at 70 years old, I'm learning that life rarely offers perfect endings. There's no guarantee that Richard has truly changed, or that he will continue on this path. There's no certainty that I won't fall back into old patterns in moments of weakness. But maybe life isn't about perfect endings. Maybe it's about starting over, as many times as necessary. About breaking toxic cycles, even when it seems impossible. About believing we can be more than our worst moments or our most painful mistakes. The money Richard demanded that morning 3 years ago was the price of my liberation. A high price, but infinitely less than the cost of remaining trapped in a life that wasn't truly mine. Today, I'm not financially rich. I live modestly. I earn enough selling my embroidered pieces and with my small savings. But I am immensely rich in other ways. In genuine friendships, in purpose, in inner peace. In a courage I didn't know I possessed. And if there's one lesson I'd like to leave for my granddaughters, for all the women I meet through new beginnings, it's this. It's never too late to say no. It's never too late to rediscover who you are when you're not living to please others. It's never too late to start over. At 70 years old, I'm not ending my story. I'm just beginning to write the most authentic chapters. I closed the journal and watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. Tomorrow would be another day of work at the organization, another opportunity to transform my pain into purpose, my experience into guidance for others. The doorbell rang. It was Marissa with a bottle of wine. "To celebrate," she said, walking in. "What are we celebrating?" 3 years since you said no. 3 years of freedom." We smiled and toasted under the sunset sky. "To courage," I proposed. "To Eleanor," Marissa corrected, "finally living her own life." Now, if you liked this story, click to subscribe. And tell me in the comments what part blew you away. Oh, and don't forget to become a member to get access to exclusive videos that I don't post here. I'll see you there.